Tea brands sold across the UK are now raising serious health concerns, and many people drinking them every morning have no idea. Some of these teas have been found to contain plastic-based fibres like polypropylene, which can release tiny particles that may accumulate in the body and have been linked to inflammation and possible hormone disruption. Independent tests have also detected traces of agricultural pesticides. Because of these concerns, we took a closer look. And the deeper we looked, the more troubling patterns began to appear. In this video, we're revealing what we found and highlighting 9 English breakfast tea brands you should avoid. But we're not stopping there. We'll also introduce 2 tea brands that stand out for better leaf quality, clearer sourcing practices, and stronger feedback from tea drinkers. This isn't sponsored, just honest feedback based on what our research uncovered. Brand to avoid 9, Sainsbury's Red Label. At first glance, Sainsbury's Red Label looks like a simple, affordable English breakfast tea. It's one of those supermarket staples that many people pick up without thinking twice. The packaging promises a strong, classic British brew, the kind of tea that's meant to start your morning the right way. But once you look beyond the label, this blend has been the subject of repeated criticism from tea drinkers and reviewers alike. One of the most common complaints about Sainsbury's Red Label is the quality of the tea inside the bags. Instead of full tea leaves, many customers say the contents look more like fine powder or tea dust. In the tea industry, these tiny particles are known as fannings or dust, which are often the leftover fragments produced during large-scale tea processing. Dust-grade tea isn't necessarily dangerous, but it usually means lower quality leaves. Because the particles are so small, they release flavour very quickly, which can make the tea taste overly bitter or harsh compared with blends made from larger leaf pieces. Another issue frequently mentioned in customer reviews is inconsistent flavour. Some buyers say the tea can taste strong one day and unusually weak the next, suggesting the blend may rely on large bulk sourcing from multiple plantations to keep costs low. There have also been wider discussions within the tea industry about packaging materials used in certain tea bags, including plastic-based sealing methods that help keep bags from falling apart in hot water. While this approach is common across many mass-market brands, it has raised questions among some consumers about what exactly ends up in their cup. Put all of that together, and it's easy to see why Sainsbury's Red Label often appears in conversations about budget teas, where cost savings may come before leaf quality. And if you think this is concerning, the next brand on the list has faced even stronger criticism from tea drinkers who say the flavour has changed dramatically over the years. Brand to avoid 8. Asda Extra Special Gold. The name Extra Special Gold sounds like something premium. When shoppers see those words on the box, it naturally creates the impression that this is a step above ordinary supermarket tea, something richer, smoother, maybe even closer to a traditional English breakfast blend. But when you look at the feedback from tea drinkers who buy it regularly, a different story starts to surface. One of the most frequent complaints about Asda Extra Special Gold is that the tea doesn't taste very different from standard supermarket blends, despite the more premium branding. Many customers say the flavour is surprisingly weak, often requiring 2 tea bags just to produce a cup strong enough to resemble a typical English breakfast tea. That alone raises an important question about the blend itself. In many mass-produced teas sold at this price point, the contents of the bag are usually made up of very small tea fragments, known in the industry as dust or fannings. These tiny particles release colour quickly in hot water, which helps create that dark appearance people expect from a strong brew. But the downside is that the flavour can come across as flat, overly sharp, or lacking the depth found in larger leaf pieces. Customer reviews frequently mention this exact issue. Some describe the tea as watery, thin, or lacking body, while others say the taste simply doesn't match the premium image suggested by the packaging. There's also the broader reality of how many supermarket teas are sourced. To keep prices competitive while producing huge quantities, blends are often created using bulk tea, purchased from multiple large plantations across different countries. While this keeps the supply steady, it can also mean that the final blend prioritizes consistency and cost efficiency over leaf quality. So while the box may suggest something refined, many tea drinkers feel that Asda Extra Special Gold ends up tasting remarkably similar to far cheaper blends sitting right beside it on the shelf. If you think this one feels misleading, the next brand on the list is even more surprising, because it's one that many British households have been drinking for generations. Brand to avoid 7. Morrison Savers Tea. Morrison Savers Tea sits at the very bottom of the price ladder in many UK supermarkets. The entire purpose of the Savers line is simple. Keep the cost as low as possible so shoppers can buy a box of tea for just a few pounds. And when a product is pushed that far down in price, something almost always has to give. In this case, many tea drinkers believe that the sacrifice is the quality of the tea itself. A quick look through customer feedback reveals a consistent pattern. One of the most common complaints about Morrison's Savers tea is the harshness of the flavour. Instead of the smooth, balanced taste people expect from an English breakfast tea, many buyers say the brew comes out overly bitter and aggressive. The reason may lie in what's actually inside the bag. Budget teas often rely heavily on very small tea fragments known as dust or fannings. These particles brew quickly and create a dark colour in the cup, which can make the tea appear strong. But because they release tannins so fast, the result can sometimes taste rough or astringent, rather than full-bodied and rounded. Some customers have even mentioned opening the tea bags and noticing that the contents resemble fine powder, rather than recognisable tea leaves. Another criticism that occasionally appears in reviews is inconsistency. Some boxes seem noticeably stronger or weaker than others, which suggests the blend may rely on large bulk sourcing where the exact mix can vary depending on supply. None of this is unusual for ultra-budget tea. When the goal is to keep prices extremely low, manufacturers often focus on volume and colour in the cup, rather than leaf grade or complexity of flavour. For people simply looking for the cheapest possible tea, Morrison's Savers might still do the job. But if you're expecting the kind of depth and balance normally associated with English breakfast blends, many tea drinkers say this is one box you may want to reconsider. This one feels a bit rough around the edges. The next brand on the list is even more surprising, because it's a tea name that once held a much stronger reputation in British households. Brand to avoid 6. Typhoo Original. Typhoo is one of those tea brands that carries a long history in Britain. For many people, it's a name that brings back memories of older advertising campaigns and a time when it was considered one of the country's most reliable everyday teas. But in recent years, the reputation of Typhoo Original has started to shift, and not always in a positive direction. If you browse through modern customer reviews, one theme appears again and again. The flavour doesn't feel the same as it once did. Longtime drinkers often say the tea tastes thinner, weaker, or less balanced than they remember from years ago. One possible explanation lies in the grade of tea used inside the bags. In large-scale tea production, the leaves are sorted into different grades after processing. Higher grades usually contain larger leaf pieces, while lower grades consist of small fragments known as fannings or dust. These smaller particles brew very quickly, producing strong colour in the cup, but they can also create a taste that many people describe as flat or overly sharp. Several reviewers who opened Typhoo tea bags out of curiosity have pointed out that the contents often appear very fine and powder-like, suggesting that a large portion of the blend may rely on these smaller fragments. There's also the issue of competition in the modern tea market. Over the years, supermarkets have introduced many low-cost house brands, which means older companies like Typhoo have had to compete on price more aggressively than before. And when price becomes a major factor, the blend itself sometimes changes to keep production costs under control. The result, according to many tea drinkers, is a tea that still carries a historic name, but doesn't always deliver the same experience people remember. Typhoo may still work for those who simply want a quick, inexpensive cup of tea. But if you're looking for a richer English breakfast blend with more depth and aroma, it's a brand that increasingly appears in conversations about declining tea quality. The next brand on the list is even more familiar, because it's a tea found in millions of cupboards across the UK. Brand to avoid 5. Tetley English Breakfast. Tetley is one of the most recognisable tea brands in Britain. For generations, it has been a familiar presence in kitchen cupboards, often associated with an easy, everyday cup of tea. The brand has built its identity around reliability and tradition within British tea culture, but when you start looking more closely at how Tetley's tea bags are constructed, a different kind of concern begins to appear. Like many large tea brands, Tetley has historically used tea bags that rely on polypropylene fibres to seal the bags together. These fibres help the tea bag maintain its shape and prevent it from falling apart when placed in boiling water. The issue that has raised questions among some consumers is that polypropylene is a form of plastic. When the tea bag sits in very hot water, that plastic-based sealing material is exposed directly to the brewing process. Researchers studying microplastics in food and drink have increasingly looked at tea bags as a potential source of microscopic plastic particles entering hot beverages. While regulators say these materials are considered safe for food use, the idea that a plastic-based fibre is involved in something people drink every day has still made some consumers uneasy. Tetley has said that it has been working on reducing plastic in its packaging and tea bags, but discussions about plastic-based sealing fibres in tea bags have continued to come up whenever people begin examining what's actually inside the products they use daily. For many people, Tetley remains a familiar and convenient brand. But once you start asking what exactly goes into the construction of the tea bag itself, not just the tea inside, it introduces a question many drinkers never thought to ask before. Before we move on to the next brand, if you're finding this investigation helpful so far, kindly take a moment to like the video and subscribe to the channel. It really helps us continue looking into everyday products people rarely question. And the next brand on the list raises a completely different issue, one that involves how some blends are produced and how their flavor profile has changed over time. Brand to avoid 4. PG Tips Original. PG Tips is another tea brand that has been deeply woven into British tea culture for decades. For many households, it's simply the default choice, the box that ends up in the trolley week after week without much thought. The brand has long promoted itself as a proper everyday tea, something dependable that delivers a strong cup every time. But when you look closely at the feedback from tea drinkers and industry discussions around mass-produced blends, PG Tips often comes up in conversations about consistency over quality. One of the most common criticisms from customers is that the tea can produce strong colour but surprisingly little flavour. At first glance, the cup looks exactly how people expect English breakfast tea to look: dark, bold and rich. But many reviewers say that once they actually taste it, the flavour can feel thin or slightly bitter rather than full and balanced. This often comes down to the type of tea grade used in the blend. Like many large-scale tea brands, PG Tips relies heavily on smaller tea particles known as fannings or dust. These fragments are produced when tea leaves are broken during processing and sorting. Because they are so small, they release tannins quickly, which creates that dark colour in the cup. But they can also make the flavour sharper and less complex than blends that contain larger leaf pieces. Another point frequently mentioned in consumer reviews is the pyramid-shaped tea bags PG Tips uses. These bags were introduced as a way to give the tea more room to move during brewing, which in theory should improve flavour. But many tea drinkers say that despite the unique shape, the tea inside still feels very similar to other mass-market blends. There's also the reality of how these large brands operate. To produce millions of tea bags consistently across different markets, companies often rely on huge volumes of tea sourced from multiple plantations around the world. That approach helps maintain supply, but it can also mean the final blend focuses more on uniformity and cost efficiency than on the character of the leaves themselves. For many people, PG Tips still delivers the kind of quick, familiar cup they're used to, but among tea enthusiasts and reviewers who pay close attention to leaf quality, it's a brand that often appears in discussions about industrial-scale tea blending, rather than carefully sourced tea. If you think PG Tips feels like a big name already, the next brand on this list carries an even stronger reputation, one that many people automatically associate with premium tea. Brand to avoid 3. Twinings Everyday Tea. Twinings is one of the oldest and most respected tea brands in the world. The company has been around for centuries, and its name is often associated with heritage, tradition, and higher-end tea blends. When many people see the Twinings logo on a box, they naturally assume the tea inside must be better than the typical supermarket options. But the reality is a little more complicated, especially when it comes to the Twinings Everyday range. This particular blend was created to compete directly with the more affordable teas found on supermarket shelves. And because of that, many tea drinkers say the quality of the everyday blend feels noticeably different from some of Twinings' more premium offerings. One of the most common observations from customers is that the tea can taste lighter and less complex than expected from the Twinings name. Some reviewers say the flavour feels somewhat muted unless the tea is brewed for longer or made with 2 bags instead of 1. Just like many other large-scale tea blends, this can often come down to the grade of tea used inside the bags. When tea leaves are processed and sorted, the smallest particles, known as fannings and dust, are often used for fast-brewing tea bags. These fragments create colour quickly in hot water, but they can also produce a flavour that some people describe as thin or slightly bitter compared with blends made from larger leaf pieces. Another factor that sometimes appears in discussions about everyday blends is large-scale sourcing. To maintain consistency and keep prices competitive, tea companies often combine leaves from several major tea-producing regions. This blending approach ensures the flavor stays roughly the same year after year, but it can also mean the tea is designed more for reliability and affordability rather than distinctive character. None of this means Twinings makes poor tea overall. In fact, the brand produces several highly respected blends in its higher-end ranges. But when it comes to the everyday version specifically, many tea drinkers say it feels more like a budget blend wearing a premium name. And if that feels surprising, the next brand on the list might be even more unexpected, because it's a tea that many people passionately defend as the best everyday brew in Britain. Brand to avoid too: Yorkshire Tea. Yorkshire Tea is one of the most loved tea brands in the UK. In fact, many people would argue it's one of the best everyday teas you can buy in a supermarket. The brand has built a strong reputation around its identity as a proper British brew, and its loyal following is proof of how much trust it has earned over the years. But even with that strong reputation, Yorkshire Tea still shares many of the characteristics found in other large-scale tea brands. Like most mass-market English breakfast teas, Yorkshire Tea is produced in extremely large quantities. To maintain a consistent taste across millions of tea bags, the company blends tea leaves from several major tea-producing regions, including places like Assam in India and plantations in Africa. This blending approach helps ensure the flavor remains stable from one box to the next, regardless of seasonal changes in tea harvests. However, some tea enthusiasts argue that this large-scale blending can also mean the tea is designed primarily for consistency rather than leaf quality or freshness. Customer feedback about Yorkshire Tea is generally positive overall, but even among loyal drinkers there are occasional comments about the tea tasting stronger or slightly harsher than expected, especially if it's brewed for too long. It's also worth remembering that Yorkshire Tea, despite its regional branding, is still part of a large global tea supply chain. The leaves used in the blend are grown in several countries and then processed to create a uniform flavor profile that appeals to a wide audience. None of this necessarily makes Yorkshire Tea a bad product. For many people, it still delivers the kind of strong, reliable cup they enjoy every day. But when tea drinkers start exploring blends that focus more on leaf size, freshness, and traceable sourcing, it's often the point where they begin noticing the differences between mass-produced tea and smaller batch alternatives. Speaking of large global tea brands, the next one on this list might be the most recognizable of them all, a name that appears in supermarkets around the world. Brand to avoid 1. Lipton Yellow Label. Lipton is one of the most recognizable tea brands in the world. Walk into almost any supermarket, hotel or cafe, and there's a good chance you'll see that familiar yellow label somewhere on the shelf. For decades, Lipton has positioned itself as a global tea brand, something dependable, affordable, and easy to find almost anywhere. But that global scale is also where many of the criticisms begin. Feedback around Lipton Yellow Label often reflects a different kind of concern, not just about taste, but about how the tea is produced at such a massive scale. Lipton is owned by one of the largest consumer goods companies in the world, and its tea is produced for global distribution across dozens of countries. That means the priority is often maintaining the same flavor profile everywhere, whether the box is sold in London, New York, or Tokyo. To achieve that consistency, the company typically blends tea from multiple large plantations across different regions, creating a product designed to taste the same year after year. For many casual tea drinkers, that reliability is exactly what they want. The cup looks familiar, the strength feels predictable, and the brand itself has been around long enough that people trust it. But among tea enthusiasts, this approach is often described as commodity tea production, where the goal is to produce enormous quantities of tea that meet a global standard, rather than focusing on the distinct character of individual harvests. There have also been discussions over the years about pesticide residues found in some mass-produced teas, including testing that has occasionally raised questions about agricultural practices across large plantation supply chains. While companies maintain that any detected levels fall within regulatory safety limits, the issue has still contributed to growing curiosity among consumers who want to understand where their tea actually comes from and how it is produced. So now that we've gone through the brands you may want to think twice about, let's move on to 2 English breakfast teas that stand out for far better quality and transparency. Safer option 1, Jing English Breakfast. It's only fair to mention tea companies that take a different approach. One name that frequently comes up among tea enthusiasts in the UK is Jing Tea. Unlike most supermarket brands, Jing focuses on sourcing higher quality tea directly from specific farms and growing regions. Instead of relying heavily on dust or very small fragments, their blends typically use larger leaf pieces, which brew more gradually and create a smoother, fuller flavor. Another reason many tea drinkers appreciate Jing is transparency. The company openly shares information about where its teas come from and how they are sourced, which is something more consumers are starting to look for. Customer reviews often describe Jing's English breakfast tea as richer, more aromatic, and better balanced than many mass-produced blends. And while it may cost a bit more than a typical supermarket tea, many people feel the difference in leaf quality and flavor makes it worth considering. Safer option 2, Rare Tea Company English Breakfast. Another tea that consistently stands out for quality is Rare Tea Company English Breakfast. Unlike most mass-market brands, Rare Tea focuses on sourcing tea directly from small farms, working closely with growers rather than buying large anonymous batches from global commodity markets. Many drinkers say the flavor feels cleaner, brighter, and more aromatic, rather than simply strong or dark in color. Instead of relying on a quick burst of tannins, the tea tends to develop gradually in the cup. Another reason Rare Tea Company has gained attention is its presence in restaurants and specialty cafes. Many chefs and hospitality groups in the UK have started serving their teas because they want something that feels closer to traditional tea preparation rather than the standard supermarket bag. Of course, teas produced this way are usually more expensive than everyday supermarket blends, but for people who care about flavour and how tea is handled before it reaches their kitchen, it's a brand that often comes up as a reliable alternative. And that brings us to the bigger takeaway from this entire investigation. Not every English breakfast tea on the shelf is produced the same way, and once you start noticing the differences, it becomes much easier to decide which ones deserve a place in your cupboard. I believe you found this breakdown helpful. Kindly share this video with someone who drinks English breakfast tea every day. It might just change the next box they pick up at the supermarket.